The word incarnation comes from the Latin word carne, which means meat or flesh. Mm-hmm. You know that. But it's meaningful to me because basically what we're saying with the word incarnation is God put flesh on. He came into the world to be a human being, to live among human beings, to experience a human life, to be present to us, God in the flesh, God with skin on. Mm-hmm. Hi, everybody. This is David Dwight. I'm part of the team at Hope Church in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome to this edition of the HOPECAST. I'm here with my friend Knupp. And this episode may feel a bit like a continuation from our last one, which was about gratitude and Thanksgiving and reflections like that. And I think this one we're going to move into discussing Christmas, Advent. What does this mean from a Christian standpoint? We'll talk a little bit about sort of preparing for Christmas and Advent and that kind of thing. But welcome back. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
All right, so I'm going to start with a couple little fun warm-up questions. When you were a little kid in your growing up years, did you do Advent calendars? You know, the kind of you open the window and you're moving along in December?
The simple answer is no.
Okay.
We did Advent candles, not calendars.
Okay.
Our family was not a big tradition kind of family.
Okay. So tell me about the Advent candles.
Well, that connected with church easily, and we were a faith-based family who would be found in church Christmas time, special time of the year. So we would participate in lighting those candles and just understanding the symbolism behind them.
Okay. So you're talking each week of Advent, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Did you have like a wreath or a circle of the candles, like on a table, or how did you do it as a family?
At home, we did not. The closest we would have come is that we had, what did they call it? We had little Advent decorations of angels that you find them in Germany oftentimes that would... the candles would heat the paddles, and the angels would spin around, and that was the connection in our home.
Yeah, I know exactly what we're talking about. When you think of Advent and Christmas, like this is like, Rorschach test, what do you think of? What comes to mind?
For me, growing up, it was always just family. We were transplants to upstate New York, and all our family was down in southern Pennsylvania. And so every Christmas, we went to be with family. We rarely saw them during the year, and my mom especially longed to spend more time with family. Uh-huh. So Christmas was her time. Okay. And we would make the long drive, 8 hours down there to spend most of the week with family.
With your mom's family particularly, it sounds like.
Both my mom and dad were from the same small town in southern Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Okay.
All my cousins were there.
Okay.
It was family.
Do you have a memory of a Christmas gift one year when you were a kid and you're like, man, eureka, we hit the gold mine this year?
It's a little embarrassing. Maybe not so much. One year.
Now I'm curious.
My dad gave me barbells.
Wow!
I was going to bulk up. I was going to go from that skinny 97-pound weakling. We even have some home movies. Boy, they're painful to look at. I'm lifting funny. These little things with about 10-pound weights on either end, and I'm doing the curls, and I was so excited to get these
You're going to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, my dad hid them in the trunk of his car because he knew I'd be looking for that Christmas present all over the house.
Okay.
And it was a total surprise when I got
Had
my
you
barbells.
asked for them? Do you remember?
I think I must have.
Okay. Okay, now let's flip the coin. You're now a parent. What are a couple of things that you remember you and Cindy may be doing for your kids at Christmas?
Yeah, we've been a ministry family, so we didn't always have a big budget for the hot items that were being advertised on TV and that kind of thing. And
of money or time on Christmas.
Yes, exactly.
We could talk about that.
Yeah. So grateful that Cindy always made the most with the least in so many ways. I remember when the Cabbage Patch Dolls were all the rage, and we had 3 daughters, so that was right in our wheelhouse. And Cindy actually went out and got all material and made her own Cabbage Patch dolls for our kids.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think of, if we're just having a moment here of ministry life, when I was brand new in ministry as a minister, and we had not yet done Christmas with me on staff in a church,
Oh.
man, we had a few bumpy years. Partly we hadn't really learned to talk about it. We hadn't shared, what's the expectation? When are you home? When are you committed to be at church and all that kind of stuff? And I think we had 2 or 3 years that did not go well. And it was not a happy Christmas. And then at least finally we said, wait, you know what? We just need to really communicate well on this. And Elizabeth, wonderfully, she'd be like, I fully embrace and I'm happy that, you've got commitments. For me, it's just knowing when will you be home, when can we plan, when can we expect you, and when not. The first couple of years, there wasn't that kind of communication. And so there was,
It's a busy season.
It's beautiful, but it is busy. So Advent is tied to the idea of waiting.
Yes.
And Advent is, the church sort of recognizes Advent as a season in the year, a season of waiting, a season of anticipating. This brings a lot of thoughts to mind for me, but I don't want to steer them. I just want to start there and say, when you consider Advent a season, a time of waiting or anticipating, what does that mean for you?
Let me start this way. I came into pastoral ministry pretty late in life, and I did not come out of a liturgical background. I had gone to seminary, I had qualified, gotten a Master of Divinity, which I had not been using until I got this pastoral call late in life. I took my first church, and I showed up December 4, first Sunday of Advent was my first Sunday in this new church that I'm the pastor of, and I'm trying to come up to speed and figure all this out. And a few of the folks in church were a bit more liturgically educated than I was. And so you're laughing already. I set up
for a million reasons. Yeah.
I set up a few Christmas hymns. And I was schooled by some of these elders that you didn't sing those hymns until Christmas
too early.
itself. Yes, because Advent is a time of waiting and anticipation, and you don't unwrap the present before Christmas Day, you know. Right. And I had no idea. I was in trouble before I'd even started.
This, of course, brings to mind, we could go down the trail of, ministers and church bloopers and mistakes and all that. We'll spare everybody that. But what about this idea of waiting, even from a biblical standpoint, waiting, anticipating, what comes to mind?
Yeah, that's just got to be the hardest thing for most people is waiting. We are doers, and especially in the Western world, we're a make it happen kind of society, and we're just not very good at waiting at all. And so this, if you're thinking in terms of spiritual disciplines, this is a wonderful spiritual discipline. And of course, when you connect the whole idea of a 9 months pregnancy, a time of waiting, with this season of Israel waiting for the Messiah, it all coalesces to get us to think about what it means to wait.
That's beautiful. You said, it all coalesces. I'm not sure that everybody has it coalesce as readily as you just expressed it. So to tie the idea of Advent in the church season, where we generally are talking more or less about a month, where we begin to recognize that we're in the season of waiting for the birth of Christ, anticipating the birth of Christ, and you named a couple of important things. One, we have these Old Testament prophecies, and, Isaiah is full of them. but other scriptural places that talk about the anticipation of the birth of the Messiah.
And 700 years before the birth of the Messiah.
Right. So one of my very favorites, I love Isaiah, so much beautiful language that he expresses. But, Isaiah 9, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. That's one of a number of, I think the sort of technical phrase would be messianic prophecies in the Old Testament that lead us to anticipate there is a Messiah coming, there is a Messiah coming. Because you, in a beautiful way, connected it to Mary anticipating the birth of Jesus. So once the angel visits Mary and he says, you will conceive, she says, how will it happen? The Holy Spirit will come upon you. Okay, so then she is anticipating the birth of the Messiah, right? Mm-hmm. In a very unique way. Mary as a biblical figure is another topic for us. I think she's under-recognized in Protestant circles, sometimes maybe because Protestants are sort of afraid of the Catholic thing and, let's not overdo Mary. Mm-hmm. So some Protestants are like, well, you Catholics overdo Mary. I've heard some Catholics say, well, you Protestants overdo Paul. You virtually venerate Paul and his teaching and his letters. Okay, but Mary has perhaps the most unique experience in anticipating the birth of Jesus that any human being ever had. So for you to tie Advent to her in terms of the 9 months from conception to delivery, that's powerful to me. In a way, Mary becomes an analogy for the people of Israel. The Old Testament scriptures have given the promise of the birth of a Messiah. And the Jewish people then are a people in waiting, a people anticipating the coming of the Messiah. Mary exemplifies this. And of course, she was a young woman. People speculate 15-ish years old. And she, in a way, exemplifies Israel, the promise of the Messiah, the anticipation of the birth of the Messiah. So waiting and anticipating is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Pete Boel on our ministry staff and I have talked about a book that we appreciated a lot, simply called Advent by Fleming Rutledge. Fleming Rutledge is an Episcopalian minister. Fleming is a woman, and we kind of jokingly refer to her as the prophet in pearls. She's this very elegant-looking woman, if you've seen pictures of her. She's usually got like pearls and a silk scarf on, and she has this very prophetic voice. It's really fun. That's another story. She wrote a book called Advent. People, you can find it on Amazon or wherever you want if you want it, by Fleming Rutledge. She says that Advent is to help the church anticipate the return of Christ. Mm-hmm. She says that's much of what we ought to embrace in Advent. So just as, quote, in the Old Testament, Israel is anticipating the coming of their Messiah, she says in Advent, the church should be deeply engaging in Advent the coming again of the Messiah, which is powerful to me.
Yeah, instead of looking back, we're looking forward at Christmas.
Exactly. So she's really in that book trying to like turn our head in the direction that, as you're saying it, rather than spend all our energy by saying the shepherds were in their fields by night and the angel of the Lord had shone around them and the glory of the Lord and so on. Like it's all nostalgia. She's saying, first of all, she wouldn't probably call it nostalgia. Secondly, she doesn't come across as a nostalgic person. I think she would say, we have the historic record of the coming of Christ. Yes, we should celebrate that by remembering it. But for the purpose of building our anticipation of his return.
Wow.
Not just to sink into nostalgia and Christmas carols and hot cocoa.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I think waiting really deepens faith. You would think maybe just the opposite. You would think waiting and not receiving the promised return, in this case, in full yet,
Yeah.
would shake our faith.
Yes.
But I think in reality, the opposite is true. The more you wait in faith, the stronger your faith becomes. Faith is the substance of things unseen, hoped for, but not yet attained.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is beautiful. I want to press the question a little bit more, though. What about when the waiting just feels too long, and you're tempted to say, "Forget it, God. I'm throwing the towel in on this waiting."
You're not alone. You go back to the Psalms. How long, oh Lord? How long?
You can hear Bono singing it. In Psalm 40.
Right. Yeah.
So I once heard the phrase, "Waiting is only truly waiting when it's now gone on longer than you thought was reasonable."
Oh boy, that's good.
Okay. Before that time, it's anticipating, right? So, silly little analogy, but if we stop at a traffic light driving over here, like we're approaching, the light's turning yellow, so we know we're going to slow down, we're going to stop. The moment the car stops, we're anticipating. You could say we're waiting, but really what we're doing is we're anticipating. Because we know it's going to be somewhere between a minute and 2 minutes, and that light's going to turn, and then we're going to go.
Yeah.
And if it happens ordinarily like that, there was no internal angst. We just knew this is the way it works. We're waiting here between a minute and 2 minutes, light's going to turn green, and off we go. If it becomes a problem, the light hasn't turned yet. And then we're like, whoa, this is a long light. Whoa, when is this light ever going to change?
Mm-hmm.
And if it goes on really a long time, then you start to wonder if something's broken. Like, is this light not working?
Right. Yeah.
Right. But something happens because this has gone on longer than we thought it should. And whether we know it or not, I think most of the time when we're waiting for something, we might not know that we had an anticipated time frame until we have certain emotional responses that make us realize those emotional responses are connected to an anticipated time frame.
Yeah. And we have an internal clock, don't we, that anticipates a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not always in touch with that internal clock, but it's driving us in a lot of ways.
Can you share an example or two when you say we have an internal clock that anticipates a lot?
Well, we just do have an expectation of when things ought to happen or will happen. And there's so many aspects of life in this world that have not yet been resolved, and we hunger for them to be resolved.
Yeah.
And I think of people waiting for test results in a hospital.
That's a great example.
And how hard it is, the waiting. Once you have the diagnosis and you can create a plan, you feel a little bit more in control. But the waiting for those results to come back, you don't know what you're dealing with or what you're looking at. That's the hardest time. Or a child who's a prodigal. We have a friend right now, a couple whose son has been very difficult, and he all of a sudden decided, he's about 20, to take off for Europe for 4 months. He's been over there.
Okay.
Due to come home in a week.
Okay.
But the anticipation of waiting, when is this prodigal going to come home? When will he get his life together? When are we going to be through this period with this difficult child?
Yeah.
Those are hard things.
So you use the word control, which I think is a big one when it comes to waiting.
Yeah.
In a sense, to go back to the stoplight, if everything's happening ordinarily, we're not, quote, out of control.
Right.
We're just going through the expected process. It's only when the light takes a lot longer that we start thinking, what's the matter here? And wait, I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck here. Some of those emotions start to come in. But waiting and control, like, let's say you had a job interview and the person says to you, I will get back to you within 7 days to let you know the next steps. Okay? If you're within the 7 days, you probably don't have too much angst, right? Because you're within the expected and anticipated time frame. If it gets to day 10, you start thinking, did they forget? Should I contact them? Should I call and try and inquire? In other words, should I take action?
Right.
Should I try to resolve this?
Some amount of control.
Exactly. And so there is this huge idea in the scriptures that waiting is connected to trusting God.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the ability to control something.
Yeah.
And it's a deep place of a faith invitation.
It is. And two other words I think are very, very germane to the New Testament: patience, but also endurance. Yeah. And there's no other shortcut to patience and to endurance than to live through times like that. But those are qualities of the follower of Christ that are supposed to be part and parcel of who we are in Christ.
Okay, so you said in our previous podcast, we were talking about heady things. Right now, I think we're making a rather heady connection, but to me, it's meaningful. Okay, so what if the season of Advent is not just about Christmas is coming, we've got Christmas music playing in the house. What if the season of Advent is intended to coach us in the spiritual discipline of waiting? We receive it in a very different lane. Like, wait, let's not just think of this as, 28 days till Christmas kind of thing. Let's think of this in terms of the biblical concept of waiting. Like you said, Psalm 40, Psalm 13 repeats, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, do I have to wait? Another idea that comes with Advent is light and darkness. This is a pretty significant metaphor in Advent. You said when your family, when you were little, you guys lit Advent candles. The idea of the candle, it's not a mistaken random thing. It is a light in the darkness. And so the idea that in our waiting, we are seeking the light in what can feel like a surrounding darkness. And all of that takes us back to Fleming Rutledge. This is about anticipating the return of Jesus. We're waiting. We're seeking the light in what feels like a surrounding darkness. And we're doing it, yes, we are anticipating his return because he told us he'll come. But we're waiting for it because he didn't tell us when. And those become, I think, powerful ideas. So part of what I think we're saying here is, in our culture, all of the energy is on Christmas. The presents, the trees, the carols, the parties. Fleming Rutledge and what we're talking about here with waiting might say, let's try to shift the focus and the meaning of this from the big American Super Bowl of holidays to a place that invites us into spiritual growth, the spiritual discipline of waiting. What does patient endurance look like? And that each year when we come around to Advent, it's an annual experience of being invited again into that spiritual discipline to keep paying attention to waiting, trusting God. In her book, Advent, the cover of the book, which surprised me when I first got it, somebody told me about the book. I bought it probably 10 years ago. When it arrived, the cover, I looked at it, I'm like, what is that? It looks like these sort of angel figures on the cover. Well, you open the preface, and she says the cover is a painting that is a rendering of the virgins and their oil lamps waiting for the bridegroom to come. Right? Never before that book had I associated the parable of the virgins waiting for the bridegroom with Christmas. And she is emphatically saying, in a big deal way, that's what Advent and even Christmas is about. Because the purpose of remembering is to grow our confidence in the promise of what's to come.
That's well said.
Right? So when God says, remember, remember, he's not really saying, I just want you to sink into nostalgia every year. He's saying, I want you to remember for the purpose of knowing that my promises are reliable for what's to come. And even this conversation is helping me think a bit about, all right, where are the invitations in Advent that can help us enter more deeply in this?
Yeah. And I wonder if we're not already set up, in a sense, by the calendar. Things get so busy ahead of Christmas, and we're driven by so much leading up to Christmas with the parties and the traditions and one thing or another. But Christmas morning comes, and the packages are all unwrapped, and then we take down the tree and put it away. Not everybody does that right away, I know. But we do seem to have a little bit of downtime between Christmas and New Year's, at least for most of us. And I wonder if that's a time that we could use for reflection.
Yeah.
Of really beginning to think, who have I become? What do I want? What do I sense God is saying to me? What does he want to do in and through me? Just taking some quiet time to think forward in that sense as a way of anticipating that history is going somewhere, my life is going somewhere, and it matters to God.
Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe not for everybody, and it would depend on what kind of work people do or what their schedule is, of course. But there does seem to be this little bit of respite in between Christmas and New Year's. And to make it a bit of a time of reflection like that, I think can be really beautiful. How about share for a moment? I'm not sure how to ask this question. In what ways has the experience of Christmas changed for you over the years of your life? And I don't mean so much the logistics, like where we went to celebrate. I mean sort of the way you experience it emotionally and spiritually.
I'm going to go in a direction you probably did not anticipate, and it's part of Christmas that we have not talked about in this podcast yet, but a very important part. That's the Incarnation.
Yes.
So I cut my teeth in ministry with a ministry of philosophy of incarnational ministry.
Yeah.
That now Christ has come and he has set the pattern for us by identifying with us where we are, as we are, loving us for who we are, experiencing life as we know it. And that's something that I think most deeply about this time of year. What does it mean for me to live an incarnational lifestyle among other people? Probably means something a little bit different with believers than it does with non-believers. And can I continue this pattern of incarnation, of living out Christ or even being Christ by going and identifying with and being with people in the totality of their lives? And what does that look like? What does that mean? Showing up.
Being present too. I think many people listening may know, but for some that may not, when we use the word incarnation, yes, it is a kind of Christian doctrine, the doctrine of the incarnation, meaning God came into the world in Jesus Christ. The word incarnation comes from the Latin word carne, which means meat or flesh. You know that. But it's meaningful to me because basically what what we're saying with the word incarnation is God put flesh on. He came into the world to be a human being, to live among human beings, to experience a human life, to be present to us, God in the flesh, God with skin on. I love your phrase, incarnational ministry. Being present to people. What are ways that you are better at being present to people today at this point in your life than you used to be at some previous time?
Yeah. Well, maturity, years and years of making mistakes and learning from mistakes helps a good bit. I think I'm more comfortable with not having to have answers for people, with being a good listener. And in the process of being a listener, being an encourager as well. And just, most conversations, it's so easy to get caught up in trying to make a connection by thinking, okay, what am I going to say next to this person to make sure they understand, that I understand. And suddenly it makes me look good and I have a story to tell and I want to be understood, and it all comes back on me eventually. And
I know we're talking about you, but let's talk about me for a minute.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the way I think I lived a lot of my earlier life, and I think most people can relate to that. And I've learned, as I've been more comfortable with myself, more comfortable in the love of God, just to be present to people and listen to their story. Even if I don't have a lot to offer, even if I can't fix what it is that they're going through, that ministry of presence is, I think, a powerful thing.
I just think it's beautiful, Tuck. And just to bring us to the home stretch here, I sort of asked you, what are ways that Christmas is meaningful to you now and has become over the years of your life? And your answer was focusing on incarnation, being present to other people, which is beautiful, right? I mean, you could have said, I like the carols better than I used to, or whatever. But Christmas is the incarnation. Christmas is God coming into the world, being born in Christ, living a human life, living among us, experiencing human pain and struggle and difficulty. But that's your answer to that question is very meaningful to me. This idea of waiting and anticipating, one of the things that I think I've learned a little bit about myself emotionally with Christmas is, I think in some ways I've allowed myself to overdo the nostalgia of Christmas, and that doesn't always take me to good places emotionally, because that can make me sad and it can make me miss people you love who have died and gone to heaven, and you can say it's not like it used to be. And I have learned that I am tempted maybe to do that. And I really am like, I don't want to succumb to that temptation. It's not a good place. So adjusting the focus a little bit, and this conversation teaching me some great stuff, thank you, might be, all right, David, as Christmas comes along this year, I want to move more deeply into, the anticipation of Christ's return. That's a whole nother topic that maybe we can do another podcast on one day. It's a big, huge topic. But Fleming Rutledge saying, remember his birth, but not for the sake of nostalgia, so to speak, but for the anticipation of the promise of what's to come. The fact that he came once gives us confidence that he will come again. And that helps me a lot. The words that come to mind because of the richness of Christmas songs, the lyrics, come thou long expected Jesus, born to set your people free. From our fears and sins release us till we find our rest in thee. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And Tuck, thanks a lot for being here. I just love hearing your perspectives. Thanks for being a part of the HOPECAST today. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. If you're curious to know more about Hope Church in Richmond, Virginia, we'd love to invite you to check out hopechurchrva.com. And you can find both the HOPECAST and the Hope Sermons and also the FAMcast, which are all podcasts that come out of the ministries of Hope Church in Richmond. If you're hearing this and it's leading you up to Christmas, we hope you have a beautiful Advent and also a really merry, joyful Christmas. Thanks, everybody.